Well guys, welcome to Kansas. Whoever thought this was Kansas, right? You always think of Kansas as just flat plains and fields of row crops, but this right here is Kansas. I'm standing in the big basin right now, and right below me is a hole that goes, I think it goes right down into the Ogallala Aquifer, but it's a well. It's called Joseph's Fountain, and according to Native Americans, it never ran out of water throughout its history. So that's a pretty amazing thing, especially out here in Kansas. But when you look around here, it's just, you know, it amazes me how little people know about our country. You know, we hear people talking about constantly how cows and grazing animals are bad and they're causing this, you know, massive, you know, amount of carbon in the atmosphere. But I want you to just take a moment, because this is an interesting feature, and you can really see how this works out here where I'm standing. If you look behind me, and I'll show you some shots of this, there's just this basin, and it's very, very green. There's lots of grass down in there. And this whole thing, the reason why Jacob's Fountain is here is, you know, it's capturing water, and then that water is sitting down at the bottom of this basin and then seeping into the Ogallala Aquifer. This is how water gets down into the ground. And there aren't any trees. You'll notice in some of our videos when we're in places like Kansas that there are some trees now. There are obviously some trees around the water here, but you don't necessarily see trees out across the prairie. But in today, when you're driving around, you see lots of trees. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one is we stopped allowing wildfires. We keep hearing about wildfires and how bad they are, but wildfires actually kept the trees and other brush from being able to grow up on the prairies. In fact, I've heard that even in Jacob's Fountain back here, there used to not be trees. There are early on photos of this place without any trees. There's a piling up on a hill back behind me where it's a monument now. It's been concreted together, but it used to be a rock pile that the Native Americans put there to help signal where this was so people could find water. Because there weren't trees, there wasn't anything out here. The other thing that's keeping those trees and bushes away now that we don't have constant wildfires across the Great Plains, is the fact that ranchers, this is a state-owned property, but ranchers are running herds of bison on here, and I've seen it done with cattle, I've seen it done with other grazing animals, and they keep everything down. So the thing about trees is they aren't a carbon sink, they're what we call a carbon bank. And I'm not personally all that worried about carbon in our atmosphere. I have my own theories. I think that if we wanted to rebuild our topsoil from, you know, the damage that has been done with strip mining and cropping and everything else, I don't think that there's enough carbon in the atmosphere, personally, to rebuild our topsoils the way that they should be. But that's my thing. I think there's actually a carbon deficiency. But if you were trying to sequester carbon, which is part of the natural carbon cycle, trees are what we call carbon banks in that cycle. They hold the carbon above ground, they don't sequester it, and eventually the trees get old and decay. There's some trees in there that are getting old and decaying, and then they respirate carbon back into the atmosphere. So mature woods and forests, they mature it back into the atmosphere. But out here, what you see is grassland everywhere. And that grass is doing numerous different jobs. It's actually sinking the carbon into the ground. It's also allowing all the water and the moisture into the ground. And what's maintaining that process are the animals. This is the unique space. I'm out here filming bison, where bison are doing that, but in areas where we can't have bison, where, you know, maybe it's too populated or whatever, we have cows. And when you think about the number of cows and bison combined today versus how many animals once roamed the land that I'm standing on right now, it's minuscule. It is absolutely minuscule. I mean, when you look at ruminants that put off the horrible methane and carbon gases. You have elk, you have antelope, you have bison. Bison alone were over 60 million. And then when you add elk to that and antelope, there were more methane farting animals out here before we were here, and arguably enough to put off more emissions than a lot of the things that we do today. I mean, and those are the types of things I wish we had more discussions of. But when I was standing out here today, and I was thinking about, I need to stop and do a video. I was thinking about actually why I homeschool my kids. One of my kids is road schooled. That's what I call it, road schooled. But they come out and they get to see this stuff. They read in their textbooks about the homesteaders going across the Great Plains. It brings a whole new respect to that when you come out into the Great Plains and you actually see it, experience it, see what kind of wildlife is here, see the terrain. It's not just flat, and they weren't just bringing these things across flat terrain. That's what you see from the highway. But Kansas is an amazing state. I have another point on that I'm going to get to when it comes to energy, but the reality is without seeing and experiencing it, you don't really get the depth of what those people went through. The other thing that people don't get by not seeing and experiencing this is you could actually tell half the people in New York City or any of those big cities that these animals are causing environmental destruction, and because they don't see this place, or even those who come here and visit it, I'm standing out here, you could walk anywhere you want to out here, you're not going to see the bison, they're not going to come up to you. If you want to see the bison, a few people will see the bison. You actually have to know where to go to see them, and we have people to help us with that. But they're not going to understand what is maintaining it. This state-owned property, this gem here in Kansas is actually maintained by ranchers. So you remove ranchers and you go to all these fake meat stuff, and what's going to happen is all this that you see here is going to become overgrown because we've brought in trees with settlements and everything else. You're going to have trees popping up everywhere. Within a few years, this grassland is no longer going to be here, and this sink of water going into the Ogallala Aquifer is not going to be here. So you're going to start drying out the aquifer. You'll have a reverse impact on the land, on our ecosystem, by removing the animals and removing the ranchers, which is why on a wilderness property like this, they actually have ranchers helping to maintain the property, because their animals are what they need to properly maintain this prairie land. The other thing that came to me just now talking to you guys is, we constantly hear about, elections are coming up, and I know this is going to be a conversation that comes up because it comes up all the time. You've got the popular vote, and then you've got, these congressional districts, and people don't like the districting. And when you look at a map, you'll notice that large swaths of the country are one color, and then there are some very small, highly populated areas that are another color. Number one, those highly populated areas don't know anything about this out here, and they don't know the lives of the people out here. They don't know what it actually takes to maintain this type of environment out here, because they've never seen it. They hear about theories, they hear about what people who are pushing propaganda want them to believe, and that's all they have. So by having the voting system in the United States the way that it is, it gives a voice to the people that are out here. And that is so important, because you can't run a country as awesome and incredible as the United States with such a massive variety of ecosystems and all these great things if you were just going off of a few people in big cities. It's one of the most dangerous things I think we could do is get away from the Electoral College. I hear people going all the time, we got to get away from the Electoral College, go to the popular vote. It's what the populace wants. Our country was never designed to be controlled by the masses. It was always designed to give a voice to everybody and give them the right to vote, and this is the reason why. When you stand out here and you see this is why, because this works. This has been preserved and will continue to be preserved because of the way that this country was designed. So my point is I just wanted to stop and give a little bit of a rant about why we do some of the things that we do, and why are we traveling the country filming, ranchers and farms and bringing them to you guys. This is why we started our nonprofit that goes around and films all these things, is because people just don't get it. They don't see it. They don't understand it. And I could put this in video and I could share it with you guys, but unless you actually came out here and you felt it, you're still not going to completely get it. I do the best I possibly can in sharing, this incredible country with you guys. But it is just, I wish more people had the opportunity to just get out and see. Unfortunately, I feel like we are on the cusp of a generation taking control of this country who has never left their couch. And that scares the living daylights out of me. I mean, for a very long time, we've had all of these different issues and stuff come up. And the reason why they've never really taken root is because people did get out. They couldn't be glued to a computer, glued to social media, glued to these things and never get out and experience. They had to go places, and people did that. They understood things. Now, we have a completely different generation that's coming up, and the reason why they buy into some of this stuff is because they don't. And it's, it scares me, because that is when you could have some serious consequences. And as we get into, even as soon as this next election cycle, some of that generation is going to start making decisions. And it's our job as parents, it's our job as experienced citizens of this country to help people understand it. And I don't mean in a negative way. I don't mean going out and bashing people, but I mean in a positive way. I've listened to a lot of people lately, people who I've always thought were good people, just sound like they're giving up on trying to help others understand, this lifestyle, the things that are important. And I disagree with that, because I think that there are a lot of good people out there, and I think a lot of them are just miseducated, and I think a lot of them haven't had opportunities to see and experience. And the other thing is those opportunities are constantly getting smaller and smaller. I mean, we have these state parks we can visit, but most of the land that you see out in these areas is institutionally owned. When you drive across Kansas and you see windmills as far as the eye can see, those people don't live here. They're not small farms. They live in, cities somewhere else. They're just investors. Like Bill Gates, just buying up land everywhere, putting whatever they can on it to make money. They don't care what the aesthetics are. And that, unfortunately, ruins this country in several ways. When you start making it unaffordable for a small farmer to come in, small farmers can't possibly afford the land out. And even in a place like this, as arid as Kansas can be, it would take hundreds and hundreds of acres to do anything productive with your life. And most of us can't afford it because, the institutions, the big corporations and large investors have been buying this land up. And the more technology and stuff they put on there, I mean, those windmills would never make a buck on their own without, the taxpayer dollars backing them, or wind turbines. But they put them out there, and they're getting rich off of taxpayer money by doing this stuff. And then they're increasing the property values to the point where small farmers can't exist anymore. And the more that happens, the less opportunity there is for you and I and everybody else to come out here and enjoy this stuff. Because how many billionaires do you know? How many big corporations do you know? You think they're just going to let you trespass on their property? No. So there are a lot of things that I see going on, and sometimes I just have to stop and speak my mind a little bit. And and remind you guys why it is that I'm out here doing what I'm doing. I am trying to help share what's left of it with everybody else, so that people see a point in protecting it. You know, when I say buy local, I'm not just talking about going to the store down the street and buying local from your local farmer. I'm saying buy within your community. That community could be across the United States, but it's supporting, you know, people like you and I who are out there trying to grow things, trying to establish a business, trying to buy land to be able to do more with ourselves. I understand the necessity of having some of those big corporations to feed the masses. I'm not saying that they're unnecessary, but I'm saying that the balance is getting flipped, and it's getting flipped very quickly. And a lot of these things that people are buying into, a lot of this crud that people are buying into is flipping it faster. It's making those people more and more money. I mean, seriously, you drive across Kansas and you see those wind turbines as far as you can see, and that's taxpayer money going to some landowner in another state that just bought it up and, you know, put a bunch of crops on there. And, you know, then they're going to tell you eat plant-based because I'm growing crops, and switch to this type of electrical power. And yet those things wouldn't exist, number one, without the fossil fuel industry. I mean, you can look at these turbines and see the oil spewing out of some of them. The materials that they're made out of couldn't be produced without the fossil fuel industry. And I'm not like saying I like alternative energy sources. I've got solar panels that are in my rig as I drive it. You know, I'm just saying, putting it into perspective. And they don't produce enough energy to offset their costs, so nobody that's getting rich off this stuff would be able to get rich off of it without you, the taxpayer, or you know, those of you who don't pay taxes without inflation, because that's your tax. So it's just mind-boggling. Sometimes I have to, let my tongue rattle a little bit. Hopefully I don't offend anybody. That's not my intention. My intention is just to bring this to you. So just one more thing real quick. It's getting windy out here. But I realize that I probably sound like I'm bad-mouthing a lot of the big players out there, and that's not my intention at all. I'm explaining a different scenario. There's a different scenario between a large local farmer out here, large rancher, and some of the big industrials that come into these areas. In some cases, there's no difference at all. When you think about the Electoral College and voting rights, when you go to popular vote systems, you take away voting rights of the people who actually live on these lands, live and work these lands. And you give more power to those big corporations and billionaires who have no voting rights in this particular area because they live in LA or New York or one of those places. And so what ends up happening is you give more and more control to this resource to people who aren't in the area at all, who are literally milking it, if you think about it that way. Think about how important this state, this flyover state, not, you know, you could drive for miles and not see too many people out here. But just think about how important this state is when it comes to everybody's ability to get food, everybody's ability to get meat, everybody's ability to have gasoline and oil, everybody's ability to have electricity. That's why there's wind turbines. So keeping that in a proper balance and keeping this resource protected is extremely important to every single one of you. And like I said, the people who live out here know how best to do that.